Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Adam, Marketing Specialist, and I'll be your moderator. We are excited to welcome Dr. John Yu as our speaker tonight, as he will discuss his workflow with the Primescan intraoral scanner. Dr. Yu is a comprehensive cosmetic, implant, and general dentist in Arizona, and is a CEREC Level 1 trainer and Exceed speaker. Before we get started, I've got a couple reminders for you. At any point during tonight's webinar, we do encourage your participation through the chat and Q&A features. Please type any questions you might have into the Q&A section of your control panel, and we'll answer them as we have time at the end of the presentation. Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand, and this webinar is sponsored by Dentsply Sirona. Dr. Yu, welcome. Thanks for being with us tonight. We're looking forward to it.
Hey, thank you, Adam. And first off, I didn't know this was a Primescan event. I thought this was how to do upper and lower dentures. Anyhow, all joking aside, welcome. I'm excited to just guide you guys in what this journey looks like using the Primescan in your practices. It's definitely something that's changed my practice, which I'll share a little bit. But I do hope that tonight's information is relevant, and informative for your practice and just for your own knowledge and how this works into your practices. So with that, tonight, again, we're talking about the power of the Primescan, scanning with the Primescan. First off, I'd like to thank Adam as well as the entire Henry Schein dental team. They work very hard for us, advocating for our practices, for us, for our team, as well as Dentsply Sirona. Dentsply Sirona is, they're the ones that manufacture the Primescan, and they're on the cutting edge of dental equipment. And they are amazing in just creating solutions for the dental practice on every level. So thank you to the both of them. And just a little bit about myself. I've been in private practice now for 13 years, been out of school since 2007. I have a private practice here in Oro Valley, Arizona, which is just a suburb outside of Tucson. Run a basic bread and butter practice. So we are both fee for service as well as PPO. I've been a Dentsply Sirona CEREC user since 2009, as well as utilizing their 3D scanner, the cone beam, since that time as well. I do a little bit of beta testing on some of their products. Also, as Adam mentioned, I do some speaking for Henry Schein, speaking for their Level 1, or for their Exceed events, which is a Primescan event, as well as just training for new users who do end up purchasing a Primescan. I do some things at CDocs and also with Spear. So those kind of about my bio. If anytime, again, you have any questions, what my practice looks like, how this has impacted my practice, we'd love to share that in any way. So really, in the short time that we have together today, the goals really are just to review the features and the power of the CEREC Primescan, and just discuss just the various applications that's available that can be digitized now. So the CEREC Primescan is not just something that images for a crown. There's more to it than just that. So it is a unique digital impressioning system. And then lastly, I'll demonstrate just hands-on what the scanning and sending workflow looks like. So this idea of scanning and sending really just means we can scan a specific case, whether it be a crown or for a night guard. And it's really simple to then just send that case over the internet to the laboratory of your choice. So we'll discuss that workflow. So first, conventional dentistry. This is probably the world that you guys all live in if you are not already some sort of digital impression user. I'm assuming most of you guys are not. So this is the workflow that for a traditional crown and bridge looks like. So you might be treatment planning a case. You might even do wax ups for that case, depending on what the case calls for. You then take a PVS impression. And then on the bottom, the lab receives the PVS impression. They pour up a model, as you see there, and then you receive the case back. Now, this particular workflow has been in dentistry for a long time and still is the main way or the most traditional way of doing things in our profession. However, in this workflow, there are many steps where things can go wrong, right? So we've all seen cases where we thought we've done very well, and then we receive the case back and we see that the crown does not seat, open margins, maybe open contacts, maybe the occlusion is too high. And oftentimes, maybe those errors occurred because there's a change in the laboratory. Possibly in the model room, they hired a new high school graduate to now make the crown or to pour the models. So that is a very important step in this process, is getting the stone to water, or the powder to water ratio correct for making these models. So again, for a single restoration, probably pretty predictable. But when we get to 2 restorations, 3 restorations, or even 4 full mouth, things can get very tricky or pretty quickly. And the same goes with implants. Think about implant restorations. When you have to restore multiple implants, having to use some sort of closed tray technique, that can become very stressful, and there's more errors that can occur. But what if we can digitize that process? But first, let's look at what our patients think about analog dentistry. All right, now bite down. And, through your nose, just breathe through your nose. Go panic. Yeah, so I love this clip because it really shows, I think, what our patients really think of analog dentistry or the conventional dentistry, right? So not many patients love having to take a mold or impression in their mouth, whether it be for a single crown, or whether it be for a night guard, whether it be for clear liners, whatever it might be. But if we can digitize the workflow, it makes it not just easier for the patient. Obviously, we want to be a patient-centric practice, but also for ourselves. So this is what the workflow looks like now. We now scan the patient, right? So in this case, we would scan with the Primescan. And then we would send that case to the laboratory of our choice. So in this case, you see we're doing the crown on number 2. And then we receive the crown back from the laboratory. So pretty straightforward. And the nice thing about this is that if there's ever anything that goes wrong, let's say the patient's crown comes off, then we can contact the lab and maybe have them remake the crown. So in this process, everything is kept as a file as well. That's what digital dentistry, that's one of the advantages to digital dentistry, is that everything now has a certain file. And also, this is temperature independent, right? So when we're talking about impressions, PVS impressions specifically, it's very temperature dependent, that when it has to travel to a laboratory, maybe it's out of state, things can get distorted along the way. But if we can transmit things now through the internet, right, through the cloud, then there's nothing that's affected. So very straightforward, very predictable. And in dentistry, that's one thing we love, is predictability. So here's a unique statistic. 16% of general dentists in the US are using some form of digital impressioning. And this statistic was taken back in 2014. And this includes not just those who are using digital impressioning just for the sake of digital impressioning, but also those who are using digital impressioning for chairside CAD/CAM solutions. So those would be people, doctors who have milling units in their practices and are actually making crowns and bridges in their practices. So 16% back in 2014. I think the last I heard, that number is now up to about 22, maybe up to 25%. So that includes, again, all digital impressioning users who are both using the full chairside solution, as well as those who are just using only for digital impressioning. And this number is only going to continue to grow over time. So really, there's never been a greater time to implement digital impressions. Really, it is right now. And maybe you love working with your lab and you want to streamline this workflow. Perhaps maybe the reason why you're looking at this now is you want to reduce costs. Perhaps you want to enhance your patient experience, right? You don't want to put that goopy impression in their mouth, and just have a better overall treatment satisfaction for the patient. Or possibly, maybe you do envision yourself having a complete chairside solution in the future, and this is just a gateway into that next step, right? This is an entry into that more comprehensive implementation in your practice. So let's talk a little bit about digital impression systems. There's many out there. These are just a few. But really tonight, I want to highlight the Primescan. And so when we're considering digital impressioning systems, there's a couple of considerations to think about. So for the Primescan, ease of scanning. And with the Primescan, it's very easy to scan with. I know oftentimes docs will say, well, it seems like the camera is actually larger than the predecessors. And I'll get to that in just a moment. It's very easy to learn. Who's going to use it in your practice? Is this something that's going to be delegated to your dental assistants? So if so, we want to make sure that it's a very easy process for them to learn, especially in this day and age when life is happening and there might be turnover in your practice. The next person that comes in, are they going to be, is it going to be easy to learn the process of how to scan, but also how to use the software? So the software is intuitive as well as the workflow. The processing speed. So you also want to look at when all the data is captured, how fast is the software, or the hardware rather, taking that data and now converting it into a 3D model. Accuracy and precision. So this is very important because now we're not just looking at the accuracy and precision of just a single prep, maybe in one quadrant, but we're now looking at the accuracy of a full arch scan. So if you want to do, let's say, a night guard for a patient, well, you want to make sure that that cross arch scan is going to be very accurate and precise, because when you receive the night guard from the laboratory, you want that to seat very perfectly and seamlessly. Restorative and other applications. So again, the Primescan is no longer just a crown making or a crown sending machine. Now this is something where we can scan anything, and you'll see that here later. How's the tech support? How's the community education? I can tell you with the Primescan, the Dentsply Sirona has amazing tech support. That's one thing that they pride on, as well as a great community of users. So within the digital impressioning world, we have both those who only have the Primescan just for impressioning, and then we have those who have the full system. So the community is large and it's growing. And then the education that Dentsply Sirona offers is amazing as well. So when you purchase or invest in this technology, there is education that does come with it. Manufacturer R&D. So that's one thing I love about Dentsply Sirona, is that they continue to be progressive, and they're always trying to outdo previous years, right? So they're always putting money into what the next, into the very best of technologies. So, but with the Primescan, I guarantee you that you are going to be, not only going to love it, but it's going to be transformative on the practice level. And then the other question to really ask is, what other future tech do you wish to purchase? So, oftentimes I hear of dentists purchasing, let's say, a cone beam, but then they purchase a different branded digital impressioning unit, and then those two pieces of technologies don't communicate with one another. So this is something that you want to getting into digital dentistry. Then if you choose a Primescan, just know that there is an amazing opportunity that Dentsply Sirona has created for you to then implement other technologies that then marries with the Primescan. So again, if this is a stepping stone into the complete system of being able to do chairside CAD/CAM in your practice, this is an awesome system to then invest in, because then that process to the next step is very seamless. And then if you want to take it one step further, getting into guided surgery using some sort of 3D cone beam, then again, Dentsply Sirona has created something amazing where their particular cone beam marries together with this particular scanner. So let's look at the Primescan a little bit more in depth. So it is smarter than its predecessors. Obviously, it's better. So the focal length is up to 20 millimeters. So what does this mean? So again, some of the questions I get is that the actual head of the camera is bigger than the predecessor, the OmniCam. And that was just because that the OmniCam was smaller, but the actual focal length, meaning of how far the camera is away from the teeth, was actually further away from, you had to be further away from the teeth to be able to scan. So with the actual Primescan, you can now be sitting right on top of the teeth to then be able to scan whatever you're wanting to image. So you can go from being on top of the teeth all the way to about 20 millimeters, whereas with, again, the OmniCam, you can only be as close as 7 to 9 millimeters and up to about 16. So really that thickness in the Primescan is made up by being now closer, sitting on top of the actual teeth. And now it's easier to scan with, meaning that we can now scan shiny materials such as gold crowns, which you'll see an example of. And also now that the machine has evolved, we also now have a touch screen and trackpad interface. So the actual screen in itself is just like a large iPad. And then we also have an increased field of view. So the camera actually captures more area than the predecessor. And it is faster. There's a faster CPU in the unit itself, so it processes more data with higher resolution. And the workflow with the actual laboratories is faster, so the data transfer is much quicker than what it was before. So here are some real scans from patients in my practice. You can see how crisp, how defined these scans are. You can also see a full arch scan here, just an image of it. You can see the detail in how the Primescan captures these teeth, as well as the restorations on them. So here's some other teeth that were scanned. So these ones were done in the office. So I am a full-on complete chairside CAD/CAM user. So I do have a milling unit in my practice, which I've had for the last 11, 12 years. So that's why you see those restorations on those second molars. But if you look, you can really see the detail that the Primescan captures with the lingual bar there, as well as some of the calculus you see. And then you can see the gold crown, as well as the areas of erosion on top of some of those bicuspids. And here are some of the margins that you can also see with the Primescan. But one thing I want to point out is that full gold crown. So if you look at the bottom picture, you can really see how well the Primescan scans the detail of the distal part of that full gold crown. So oftentimes, scanning shiny objects can be very difficult just because the light doesn't reflect very well in those areas. But with the Primescan, given just how powerful the camera is in itself, it's able to overcome those hurdles that were with some of the previous models with the CEREC. So again, faster and smoother scanning, and mainly the reason being that the camera captures more data per second. So Primescan's density of 3D points is extremely, extremely high. So let's look at this camera in action. So this is a full arch scan, and you can see in this scan, the camera is kind of going wherever and however. So there really isn't a specific way to scan, although we do recommend scanning more in a very linear pattern. But really, because it's sort of a free-for-all, this is a process that's easily delegatable. So your assistants can pick up the camera, your hygienist can pick up the camera. I mean, your 3-year-old can pick up the camera and probably scan. So really, at the end of the day, anyone in your practice can pick up the camera and scan any patient. But if you look here, you can see how well it captures not just the hard tissue, the teeth, but also the soft tissue. You can see the soft palate as well as the hard palate being scanned very accurately and very precisely. Now let's look at scanning for a prep. So I've already done some preliminary scans here, but if you look now, I'm scanning the actual crown prep that we've done. You can see how accurate and how quick it scans. And here we're taking what's called a buccal bite. So this is essentially the bite registration that would be sent to the laboratory. So in this case, this particular crown was made in the office since I'm a full CAD/CAM user. But this particular portion right here is the same regardless of whether you're sending to a laboratory or whether you're making the crown in the office. So here is the margin. You can see how the margins are very, very crisp and defined. So when you send something like that to the laboratory, it should be very easy for the technicians to be able to fabricate and create a crown. Now, just again, to follow the, to be able to make crowns in this manner and to use a CEREC, it still is important that we follow the rules of dentistry, right? So the fundamentals and foundations of dentistry must be followed. So you must have a nice prep and you must be able to image then for the laboratory to make you a good fitting crown. So what about other applications? So I just showed you what this Primescan can do with crowns. Well, you can also scan for highly aesthetic cases. So this was a case of tooth numbers 7 through 10. So in this particular case, the Primescan was used, and then the laboratory created the restorations for this case. You can also do partial dentures, right? Removables. This is actually one of my favorite things to scan for the CEREC. And the reason being is oftentimes when we're scanning, when we're taking impressions for a metal framework, oftentimes when it comes back, the fit may be off by a little bit, or it may wobble or not be stable. In the cases like that, you have to then remake the framework. So in a case like this, it's nice because now we can scan, especially for this particular example, because if you look here, let me just kind of explain the case. This patient had a bridge from tooth numbers 6 through 11. And in this case, his bridge was actually 2 millimeters above the gum line. So there was a large space between the pontics and where the gingival tissue was. So to be able to capture a good impression that wasn't going to tear was absolutely impossible. So with this case, this was actually my first case that we scanned with. This was about 2.5 years ago. We actually, at that time, used the Omnicam, but nowadays we use the Primescan. But we did use the CEREC for this case, and you can see how well the framework adapts to this 3D printed model. So what we did here is, again, we scanned with, at that time, the Omnicam, sent it to the laboratory, and the laboratory sent us back the 3D printed model with the framework that was created off that model that they printed. So then we took this and we put it inside the patient's mouth, and you can see how well everything adapts. So with this, there was no adjustments whatsoever. Everything was just seated. I mean, literally, I could have thrown this framework across the room into the patient's mouth. I mean, it was that simple. And just because now that we've done numerous cases this way, this is something that we've streamlined to my assistants to do. So really, at that very first appointment, the only thing I do, I come in the room, I'll survey the crowns a little bit if I have to do a little bit of porcelain plasty to survey them, or if I have to create rest seats, things of that nature. But once I do all of that, then my assistant will scan the case, send it to the lab, and then when we get the case back, or the framework rather, my assistants will try it in, make sure everything fits well, that the patients are comfortable, and then they'll even go as far as taking the occlusion in that wax, and they'll only call me in if I need to come in to check on something. But really, using this digital workflow has really minimized my time seeing those patients, because there's never any instance where we have to bend a wire, bend a clasp, send it back to have it remade. I mean, everything fits perfectly. And now one of the hot topics as well is digitizing the workflow for edentulous arches. So this is something that can be done. I will say that with this, they are still finding ways to make it more predictable for the border molding. So I believe that with digitizing this workflow, you still have to take some sort of border molding, like a physical border molding, just that the fit will be better in the vestibular areas. So again, many workflows to be able to use the Primescan with. And then there's other things, right? So we can do implants now with the Primescan. So you can do full arch implants. So maybe you want to restore an all-on-4, all-on-6. There are ways to do that, because now we have impression copings that are scannable rather than having to take a PVS impression with Duralon or Duralay to be able to splint those together. We have removables, which I just showed you a case of. We can do full mouth cases using the Primescan. We can also do surgical guides. So maybe you're an implant person, you're an implant clinician, and you want to be able to do guided surgeries. Well, you can image an area that's edentulous. So like in this case, patient's missing a couple of posterior teeth. You can submit that to the laboratory, and then they can now fabricate a surgical guide on top of that. And most labs will also require, in addition, some sort of 3D scan, just so that the position of the implants will be correct. Night guards, and then, of course, clear aligners. So these are all things, these are everyday things that we do in our practices. And so now we can really do less and less PVS impressions and alginate impressions, and more of digitizing each one of these treatments that we offer. So let's look at what the workflow looks like on the practice side. So first we scan the patient. Okay, so we scan the patient, we scan the working arch, we scan the opposing arch, and then we scan the buccal bite or the bite registration. So that's going to be for most cases. If you're doing night guard, you'll want those same 3 catalogs of images. If you're doing a crown, obviously you would want those 3. And then from there, the Primescan will then generate a 3D model, and then you can check this model. So here you would see if there's any areas where maybe you have a void, right? So if you had a void in a PVS impression, can you just squirt PVS into that void and put it back in the patient's mouth? Well, obviously you can't do that, right? There would be a fit issue. But with the Primescan, because it's digital, if you have some sort of void that's present, all you have to do is just turn the camera back on, rescan just that one specific area, and then you're set. So there's no need to rescan the entire arch or that particular quadrant. It's just the area where you're missing the data. So you check your scan, make sure everything looks good, and then that can now be sent to the laboratory of your choice. And the advantage of this, doing it this way is, well, number one, the lab receives the case within a matter of minutes. Number two, there is a security, it does fulfill the security regulations of sending patient information through the internet, so to speak, but also enhanced communication, right? So if your patient's still in the chair and you submit the case to the laboratory, let's say your tech opens the file within, again, a matter of minutes. If there's something that they want to see more of, maybe they want you to scan more of something, another part of the mouth. Perhaps when they look, there's not enough tooth reduction. And that's the number one complaint by all lab techs, right? So at that very moment, because the patient's still in the chair, we can go back in with a handpiece and remove more tooth structure if needed, or and then scan again. So we have that sort of benefit if we need more, if our labs need more information because the patient is still in the chair. Now on the lab side, the workflow looks like this. They receive the case, they open it up, and so that's why the communication can take place immediately. They then design the case. So most cases, most laboratories are printing 3D models from the Primescan data. There's some labs that are doing what's called SLA models, but I would say majority are doing 3D printed models. And then they produce the actual restoration or night guard or aligner, whatever it might be. And then they send that back. So that's the simple steps of what's involved on both the practice side as well as the laboratory side. And one thing to note is that with the Primescan, every case is what we call open. So the Primescan is open, meaning that it's there's an STL file. So an STL file is a file that can be 3D printed. So just like a Word document is a .doc file, a 3D printable file is what's called a .stl. And so when the lab receives the data, that's why they can 3D print models. But if you wanted to actually 3D print, you're able to 3D print a model. So that is an option for all the fanatics out there. I know that probably some of you who are watching this webinar right now, you guys own 3D printers in your practices. Maybe you want to take that to the next level. This is one way to do that. And there are some aligner companies, specifically SureSmile, where you can scan the patient's upper and lower arches, send the case in, and then they will send you back the STL files for you to print in your office. And then you can do DIY aligners in your practice and make them all on site and then deliver them to your patients. So there's some unique things there as well. Now, one of the questions, I'm sure maybe some of you guys are thinking about it, is can you scan deep margins? And the answer is yes. So you can scan everything. Again, what must be followed are the rules of dentistry. So in your practices right now, when you have a case that's where the margins go deep, how do you take a PVS impression? Are you just prepping the tooth in that area and then taking a PVS, or are you using some sort of retraction, whether it be a laser, whether it be gingival paste or retraction paste, or using some sort of cord technique? So back at University of Washington, which is a school I went to, it was a big cord school. So I'm still a big double cord person. So in cases like that, what I do is I pack my first cord, and then I'll pack my second cord, and then I'll take out the second cord right before I scan. So just like a PVS impression, right? If you're a double cord person, you'll take out that second cord and then take your PVS impression. So in the same way, that's what I do. And then you'll see here, in this particular case, again, this is a case I did in my own office. It was all milled in my office. But you can see how well the margins are in terms of the definition of the margins, how crisp they are. So there's no doubt that the technician cannot read these margins. So very, very legible here. You can see right that distal. So how do you submit a case? So this is pretty straightforward. So let's look at one case in particular. This particular one is for an upper retainer. And this is a case where my dental assistant did the scanning. And you guys might be asking, is it easy for just one person to scan? And really it is. The one thing that they might need, if you do delegate this to your assistant, is some sort of retraction of the cheeks. So sometimes, most of the time I should say, my assistants use what's called an Optragate. Maybe you guys have seen that. It's a product made by Ivoclar. It's sort of, it's a particular type of retraction that retracts the lips as well as the cheeks away from the teeth. So that way my assistant, it frees up her hand, not to retract the cheek, but she can retract the tongue and what have you. And then there are times where, she may have to go in or give the patient cheek retractors, and then the patient will hold the cheek retractors themselves, and then they will, and then my assistant will scan. And then very rarely, if there is that patient where their cheeks are glued onto their teeth, their tongue is the largest tongue you've ever seen, and has a mind of its own, then my assistant may have to call in our other assistant to sort of help with the scanning. But at the end of the day, I would say 98% of the time, the Optragate works well. So we use that routinely. So again, in this case, you can see how fast my assistant is scanning, and you can see how well the data is being captured. And if we look, let me go back here. So here's the buccal bite. And now the data is being processed. So the data here is a little bit, or the processing speed here is a little bit fast forwarded just for time's sake, but it doesn't take too long at all. And so here are the models. You can see how accurate the lower arch model is. You can even see the patient's lower retainer. So again, for this case, we made her an upper clear retainer. So again, the details are just incredible. You can see all the cusps, the grooves, the pits, and there's the upper arch as well. And then next, once we verify that everything looks good, we then go to what's called the Connect software, which is already built into the software where the scanning was done. And then we can choose a lab of our choice. You can see the different labs on there that I particularly use. Please fabricate upper retainer. In this case, it was a clear lock retainer with Glidewell. And so we enter all the data there, and then we also choose the return date. We can also upload additional files such as photos if it was a restorative case, maybe a high-end restorative case. But this is essentially the digital lab prescription. And then you see here, we then will submit the case. And now the case was received by Glidewell. So once the case is what's called commissioned, they do receive the case within a matter of about 2 minutes, maybe even less than that. And if they have any questions, they can contact our office. As long as you check it on your end that you have all the data that is required for a case like this, then everything should be fine. So let me go over a current case I'm working on. This is a full mouth reconstruction case using the CEREC Primescan. So it's a case that I'm not actually milling in the office. I am working in conjunction with my lab tech here in town to work on this case. So this is my patient. His chief complaint was that his teeth were worn down. He's an ex-rugby player from South Africa. And you can see, given his age, he's in his early 40s. You can see there's been quite a bit of wear. And so you can see there's some crowding as well. So we did some Sure Smile on him. He finished up about 6 months ago. And then we waited to see how his bite was, making sure that everything was good. This is where he finished up that. We didn't finish him perfectly just because we knew we were doing a full mouth reconstruction on him. So we just want to get close, at the same time not needing endo by preparing the teeth over aggressively. Me personally, I typically like to segment these cases where I'm not doing a whole full arch of preps at one time. So we worked on the upper anterior teeth. But first, we took all the data that we needed. So we scanned his teeth with the Primescan. We submitted it to the laboratory via Connect. And then this is the 3D printed model by the laboratory from the actual scan. And then here are the wax ups that the lab did from the data that they received. And so in addition to this, I did also send my lab tech numerous photographs of smile, or of his smile, of his lips at rest, all the things that you would need for a mock-up or of a comprehensive case of this nature. So here are my preps of those upper front 6 teeth, as you see here. And I like to use a silicone putty matrix just to make sure that I am prepping enough, but not too much. I like to stay conservative as much as possible. But you can see the actual, the details of the margins again, the preps, the scan, everything looks very nice. So here is the patient's prep teeth in their mouth. Here's the actual scanned, the prep scan with the Primescan. And then here are the preps, or here's the model 3D printed. And then this is what we've delivered. This is the day of delivery. So typically I like to take photographs about a couple of weeks after they've been delivered, but we just delivered this actually the other day, a couple of days ago. And so now we'll be moving on to the posterior teeth on the top. But with this case, I also had to add some composite onto his lower molars, simply because we are opening him up a little bit. But I'm very excited to finish off this case with my partnering laboratory. So again, the CEREC is not just for single crowns. We can now work in conjunction with laboratories to do full arch cases of this nature. And another hot topic we have are implant restorations, and there is a solution for that. So Dentsply Sirona is also, they also are the owners of Atlantis. So they bought out Atlantis a few years ago. And so there's a workflow that we can use with our Primescan to restore implant cases very predictably. So here's a case. This case was done by a surgeon. He removed the broken molar there, and then at the same time put in an immediate implant. And you can see on the bottom how well it's healed. Even the bone has grown over the implant into where the abutment was. And so we had to remove some of that bone. And so we use what's called an Atlantis flow scan body. So this is what would be the impression coping. So we would attach the impression coping to the implant. And then rather than now taking a PVS impression, which is how you would do it conventionally, you would now take a CEREC scan of this. And so that notch that you see there on that seated scan body tells the lab the actual position of the implant. Everything from the depth to the timing of the implant to the actual angulation, all of that data is given to the laboratory when you scan that notch. So that notch has to match up to the implant brand. And so there's different scan bodies for different implants, whether you're using Nobel, whether you're using Astra, Straumann, 3i, there is going to be one that's specific to the internal connection for that particular implant. And so this is very nice because how many times have you guys gotten implant restorations back from your lab using the PVS technique and maybe the crown was too high? Maybe that was because when the laboratory received your case, when they put the impression coping with the analog together, they didn't seat it all the way into the PVS impression. Or how about times when you've done multiple implant restorations? Maybe you restored 3 in the same quadrant. When you get back, all the contacts are too tight, nothing's seating. And so in that case, there might be some flex in the PVS, especially in cases where your implants are not perfectly parallel to one another. So this is where really digital workflows shine with implants, is that we don't have to work with any PVS. We don't have to create closed tray techniques or open tray techniques to be able to restore implants. And so with this case, this is how it was finished off. You can see we did a titanium abutment followed by a zirconia crown. And this was all made by Atlantis. Okay, so the Atlantis laboratory made all of it and then sent it back to us. So here's a current implant case I'm working on. It's an implant-supported removable case. So we placed 3 implants. I placed 3 implants on this patient on the lower arch. So we're just scanning right now to have the laboratory fabricate a metal framework. And then once they fabricate the metal framework, we'll try that in, and then we'll do a pickup of these other locators eventually as one of the steps in that process. But if you look here, again, very nice, because now the lab knows precisely where the implants are. For this case, we don't have to use any scan bodies or anything like that, because again, I am going to use locators and do it as a pickup. But when they create the metal framework, I want them to be exact in knowing how much metal to put over these over where the implants are located. Now, once the scan was done, this is what the model looks like. And for this patient, we also did just about a full arch makeover on the top. So we did some restorations up there. That was using the CEREC in office. And then on the bottom there, that's what the lab is receiving so that they can now create a metal framework. Now, I think if you look there, you can see he has some tori right there. So that would be a very, again, difficult area to capture using whether it be PVS or alginate. So being able to do this digitally using a digital impressioning technique, it makes it more predictable for the laboratory now to make a metal framework over those implants. And then just creating the bite together, and there it is. You can see how well those teeth now are articulated. And the lab can articulate in that fashion once they 3D print the models. Any questions up to this point? Well, before I answer any questions, let me do a hands-on demo. I know I probably talked very quickly, so we only have about an hour tonight to really discuss the Primescan and the power of the Primescan. But what I like to do is show you a demo off a typodont. So I do have a typodont here of the trainings that I use it for, but it's going to be tooth number 14 for an onlay. So I'm just going to just demonstrate the scanning strategy. I'll demonstrate what the model looks like and then demonstrate how it's sent to the lab. So really it's the scan and send protocol that we use with the laboratory. I'm going to quickly change my screen so you can see my machine here. So you guys should all see my Primescan. It should say connect software right there on the front screen. So this is the first screen you'll see when you open up the software. And so from here, we can either go to show patients or add new patients. So for the sake of this demo, I will add a new patient. And so I'm just inputting my name. I'll just put a random date, today's date. All right. Well, it's saying that I have duplicates, so I'll just use a duplicate patient, but that's how you would input a patient into the system. So once we've input the patient information into the software, it takes us to this screen. So this is what we call the administration phase. You can see up here on this bar up here that there are 5 phases. We have administration, or I'm sorry, 4 phases. We have administration, acquisition, model, and then connect. So each one of these will be something different. But in the administration phase, we're just selecting what we're doing and on what tooth we're working on. So for this particular demo, I'll be working on tooth number 14. And then under what we call indications, you'll see that there is, let me see here. We have what's called restoration type. And then there we have single restoration, we have bridge, or we have what's called jaw scan. So the jaw scan there is used when we're doing aligners or any sort of full arch scan. If we're doing something along the lines of a bridge, obviously we hit the bridge there. If we're doing some sort of crown or onlay or veneer, we would hit single restoration. So I'm gonna hit single restoration. This is an onlay, so I'll click on the onlay. And then down here, we can go as far as selecting the material if we like. So there are various materials to choose from. Maybe you're doing a ceramic for a case like this. Maybe you're doing a resin. Or you can input that information in when we get to the last step, which you'll see later. We can also select the final shade. So I'll just select the shade here. Let's select A1, and then I'll hit OK. And once we're done with all of that information, it's going to bring up what's called case details. This box, again, is just what I call our digital prescription. It'll have all the information it needs. Now we can move forward. So now we're into the next phase, which is called the acquisition phase. So here we'll now do the scanning. So we'll turn on the camera, and now we're scanning. And typically for any case, we always like to scan to the midline. if we're doing just even a single unit in one of the quadrants. Pretty straightforward. And then we come back and then we'll scan a little bit more where that prep is. Really capturing into the interproximal areas. And then we want to capture the distal of that bicuspid because that's where the contact is going to be created to by the laboratory. Now everything looks pretty good. Now I can also verify the data here at this point rather than having the CEREC generate the actual model. So I can see and check to make sure that there aren't any voids in my prep or along the margins. As you can see here, everything looks very nice. And then you can also see on the distal surface of that bicuspid, we have all the data that we need. So the lab can make a nice restoration that's going to have a nice interproximal contact. Now, all this data here that's missing is irrelevant, right? Because this is not in the area that we're working on. So really at the end of the day, this particular arch is finished for scanning. So that's the working arch. We'll also now image the lower arch or the opposing arch. Turn the camera back on. Again, I'm going to scan all the way to the midline. So now we have the data that we need for the opposing arch. You can see it has the buccal surfaces, the occlusal, and even the lingual. And then we'll take the buccal bite. So this is essentially the bite registration. Having the patient articulating down, we come in and we simply scan just a little segment. It can be about 1.5 teeth forward and back of where you're working on. As simple as that, now we have 3 catalogs of images. So once we have those 3 catalogs, we now arrow forward, and now the data is being processed by the software. So as the data is being processed, the CEREC is going to generate the 3D rendering of what we've just scanned. So you'll see that here in just a moment. And so this is where we want to now visually see that everything is indeed accurate. So if I hit what's called buccal bite registration, you can see here, if I turn off model contacts, you can see that the model is articulated for us. And to verify this step, at this point, your patient may still be in the chair, but if I really want to verify this is accurate, I can click on, there's a button here called model contacts. And then under model contacts, I can see where the actual occlusal contacts are. So you can take occlusal film, have the patient bite down, and then verify that indeed that their contacts are on these teeth to this magnitude. Now, if something is off, you can go back and retake your buccal bite scan if needed. So this is how you would evaluate for the buccal bite. Now, if you look down here, there's a green check mark. It's not colored right now because it's highlighted blue, but anything that's green means a step it was done. However, if there's not a yellow star next to any of these steps, it means that's optional. So because we're doing an onlay, if I go to draw margin, this step is actually optional. So I can draw the margin, I can define the margin for the laboratory, or I can have the lab define the margin for me. So most cases, I will do it myself, simply because I know the tooth I've prepped, rather than them having to do it. But there are times where I'll just have them do it simply because I might be running out of time, or it might be in instances where it's, again, very legible. So everything starts with a good prep. If you have a good prep, then being able to marginate should be very straightforward. So here I'm just marginating. Once I've created and defined the margin, I'll turn my model around just to make sure it hasn't fallen off anywhere. And you can see everything looks very, very accurate. So once that's completed, there is another step here, which again is not required because there isn't a yellow star. Anywhere there was a yellow star, that would again be a step that has to be done. And then once the yellow star is completed, there is a green check mark. But there is a step called preparation analysis. So this step will actually tell you how bad of a dentist you are. So this will show you if you have any areas where you're under reduced, or it will also show you if there are any undercuts. So that way you know all of that information prior to sending to the laboratory. So it's just a nice way of getting some positive feedback from the software itself. Once we have everything, or once we have all the data that we need, we then hit connect. This will then connect us with what's called the Connect Case Center. So when you invest in the Primescan, you will create your own username with password, and this is where you log in to then communicate with laboratories. So once I click the login button, there's data that's being processed so that it's going to be a file will be created for the data now to be sent to the lab. So here you again see the digital prescription. I'm going to hit enter order data. Once I hit the enter order data, it should now show us a list of laboratories here. So here we can anonymize the patient, or I can uncheck that. So I'm going to uncheck this. You can see my name's there, gender, and then here, additional files. This is where you would input if you wanted to put any sort of information regarding photos, x-rays even. So this is any sort of file that you want to submit in addition to the case itself. So for here, let's say I'm going to click on dental creations. Then we go down and hit to order information. Let me go down. Additional instructions of the purchaser. So here I can type in, please make onlay on number 14. Return date and time. So with that particular lab, I would say most labs are about 10 business days. So if we count 10 business days, we might be somewhere into the following month. So let's say, I'm just going to make up a date here. So Tuesday, March 16th, 7 a.m. And then I can hit add to cart. And then it takes us to the next screen where this is sort of like a shopping cart, so to speak. And then we can submit this cart to the lab and they would receive it on their end. So I'm not going to hit it because obviously this is a demo, but that's how you would send a case to the lab. So this again is what we call the scan and send protocol. Very easy. Everything is delegatable to your assistant if you want them to be in charge of this process. But you can see how easy that was. Now, by just observing, I know it probably took longer than what you may expect, but it is a very quick process once it becomes second nature. So I'm going to leave it up to questions, but before I do that, here's my contact information. If you have any questions regarding the Primescan or what things to look for, or maybe you want to invest, take one, just jump the step of digital impressioning and try jumping into the full system. I'd love to answer any questions you might have. So these are ways to contact me. That is my cell phone. So you can shoot me a text. You can find me on Instagram. You can also find me just on the internet as well on Facebook, which is on there. Or you can email me as well. So thank you for your time this evening. We'll leave it up to questions and then we'll call it a night.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks. We've got a few questions here. The first one is, are you taking a radiograph to confirm seat prior to scanning?
Is this for like a full arch solution? Is this what this person's asking? I
am not sure. Give it your best shot.
Yeah, no, I typically don't take any radiographs from the laboratory if I'm working on even a full arch case that you saw, just because I mean they fit very well. I mean, I'm pretty used to the whole process. If it's something that you're used to doing, taking pre-cementation radiographs, then I highly suggest that you stick to that technique. I mean, we want you to work within your comfort zone. So there's no wrong in doing it that way. I'm just comfortable at this point that everything that my lab sends me with the digital impressions I've sent, there's no guessing in anything not fitting. So good question.
Can you actually put your contact info back up so people can grab that? Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. The next question is, how did you capture the bite with no posterior occlusion on that last case that you shared?
Yep. Let me put that back up. Yeah, that's a good question. So again, I know that if it was a real case scenario for a lab, when you give them two models that's just kind of free floating in space. And even though you give them a bite registration, they don't know how to articulate it. But with digitizing the workflow, when you take that digital registration, they actually can articulate it in their software and print it accordingly with sort of like the articulation. I'm not sure what's called, but the actual hinge can also be 3D printed. So that's all taken into consideration. So they'll actually on their end receive those two arches, and then they'll also have that on a file or on their software being like this. And there's a hinge that they can design like so, and that hinge is also 3D printed. So when they put the hinges on, there's only one way it's going to articulate, if that makes sense. So again, they're not freely having to do it. So they're not printing these two models, even though they're 3D printed, they're not freely just hand articulating it. They're actually using a software to be able to do all of that.
Can you 3D print and or mill the actual night guards or aligners, or just the models?
Just the models. Yeah. So good question. Yeah, you cannot 3D print the night guards nor mill them. So it can only they can only be made once you take the scan of the arch.
Do you pay your dental assistants extra for scanning?
I've never considered paying them extra. So no, it's just part of obviously their job role. In my practice, they do quite a bit of scanning for me. They don't do any final impression scanning, meaning for crown and bridge, when I'm done prepping the tooth, I do all of that scanning. I know that I do have colleagues who actually delegate that process as well. I'm not sure what that looks like state to state in terms of what's legal or whatnot, but just for my own comfort, I prefer scanning the final scan for crown and bridge or for restorative.
I know you said you're a Dentsply Sirona CBC2 user as well, but are there any other systems that the Primescan works with that you're aware of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, unfortunately, the Primescan, if we're talking about seamless integration, like a streamlined integration, there is not. So that's one thing that Dentsply Sirona has built, is this streamlined approach of doing guided surgery. So if you purchase the Primescan and then you in the future purchase one of their scanners, the nice thing is it's very streamlined. And what I mean by that is there's no having to go through all these hoops of, taking a file and then converting into a separate file on a thumb drive, and then converting it to another file, and then having to go through another software. So everything is very streamlined. So you do all your planning on what's called the Galaxis software, which is the actual 3D scanner software. You plan your implants there. Then you import that file back into your CEREC, and that's how you then can mill a guide in your office if you choose to go that route, or you can send that information to a laboratory for them to mill.
When scanning, does it matter what surface you end on? Do you do the buccal first, then lingual, and end on occlusal, or some other order?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, there's no right or wrong way of scanning. Again, that's the beauty of the Primescan, is that it's sort of a free-for-all. However, when you do invest in this technology, I'm one of the trainers that trains on new users. We do teach a more of a methodical way. So one way that we recommend is starting on the occlusal of the posteriors, working your way to the midline, and then rolling the camera either buccally or lingually, and going all the way back posteriorly, and then rolling the camera again to the opposite surface. So if you're on the lingual, then you'll come back on the buccal, and then coming all the way across. And the reason for that is just simply, as new users, what I tend to see is because it's free for all, they kind of go too crazy, and they want to scan every single void that's present. And they overscan maybe certain places where there's already data that was scanned for. And that can bog down the processing time. So you want to be very efficient. But again, to answer the question, no, there is no right or wrong way. But we do teach a methodical approach.
All right, two-part question here. Part one, how often do you need to update the software on the Primescan? And part two, are the software updates free?
Yeah, good question. The software updates are free as long as you are in what's called the CEREC Club. So that is something that Henry Schein, there is a monthly payment for that. I don't know what the exact cost. I know the cost is, I believe, $299 for if you're a full system user. If you're just a DI user, it might be less. I'm not sure. So that's a question for your reps. And then what was the next question? I'm sorry.
How often do you have to update the software?
Yeah. The software is updated. I would say, I can't say with the Connect software. I believe the Connect software is about once, maybe 1 to 2 times a year at most. But it is free and it is very quick. So it's not anything that where you're shut down from your office, where it's the Primescan is unavailable. Like, it's nothing like that.
How do you sterilize the scanner when you're done with it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways it to be sterilized. They do have autoclavable sleeves, I believe. We just wipe down the whole end of the unit, and then there's I believe you can also put a actual plastic sleeve over it. I haven't seen anyone do that, but yeah, here's the camera. So on this metal component here, this tip part here, that can actually come off and be autoclaved. So some people do that, but I would say majority just wipe it down with like a Cava wipe. So just and that takes care of it. So haven't seen any issues.
Are you using a Mac with the Primescan?
No, I was using a Mac just now because what I used was a program called Splashtop to transfer my desktop screen from my Primescan onto my Mac to give this presentation. However, on the everyday use, no, I'm just using the Primescan. The Primescan is built on wheels. It's pretty much a Windows CPU on wheels. So it transports from room to room. So I'm just using the computer that it's on.
How do you get the patient photos onto the Primescan unit in order to send them to the lab?
Yeah, so for something like that, you would probably use some sort of USB drive, so like a thumb drive, a dongle, so to speak. So if you're taking pictures with a DSLR camera, then you would upload those onto your thumb drive, and then you can take that, upload that into your CEREC. Because again, the CEREC is just a Windows unit, so you can upload it onto the desktop if you wanted, or create a folder on the desktop. And then on that, when I was showing the demo here, when I was sending to lab where it had additional files, I would click that and then drag the file to that particular case. So very, very straightforward.
Let's see. What lab are you using for making your frameworks? Do you know if they're designing the frameworks digitally and milling it to be invested for casting, or making it to the model?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There is a lab. I'll have to get the name, but there's a lab in Oklahoma. Can't think of it right now, but they actually do design it through a software, and then the mill framework sort of laser milled. The one here in Tucson that I use, so I use dental prosthetics here in Tucson. The only thing they do is they will 3D print the model, and then they will hand make the actual framework. But both ways, I haven't seen any issues because what's accurate is the actual 3D printed model. That's the main thing. But what I will say to that, the accuracy of the result of the case is going to be dependent on the quality of the 3D printed model. So the quality has to be good. The resolutions at which the laboratory is printing those 3D models is huge. So you would have to, so when you interview laboratories that you want to partner with for digital impressioning, make sure that they're using, I mean, not only are they using a 3D printer, but that they are printing them at a high resolution. Otherwise, you will have fit issues, because I've had that happen one time for a specific case. And I asked them about the resolution, and I think that was the issue. Yeah, that was a good question, by the way.
Another good question here. How do you manage to retract the tongue when scanning the lower arch? We always seem to struggle with this in the images.
Yeah, so that's, again, that's why the Optragate is so helpful, because the Optragate frees up one hand from having to retract the cheek or the lip. So if you have the Optragate, you put that in, all of that's retracted, but now you have that free hand to now retract the tongue. So really, it takes the Optragate. Now, in the cases where I mentioned earlier, where you have the patient whose tongue is like super strong, super large, and it's just impossible, then those are times where my assistant may call in a second assistant in to help her. Usually when I do the final scan for a restorative case, when I'm taking, after I've prepped some teeth, my assistant's still in the room. So when I do that final scanning, my assistant's the one that's retracting the cheek. I'm retracting the tongue and I'm scanning. So when I'm scanning, typically I have an assistant next to me, but when my assistant scan, they use the Optrogate.
Great. And then our last question of the evening, can you do a screw retained implant restoration with the Primescan workflow?
Yeah, so you have both options. They're both available. And then Atlantis will create those for you. Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Yu, for your time this evening. If anyone has additional questions about digital impressioning or the Primescan, please feel free to email or connect with Dr. Yu, or email us at webinars@henryschein.com, and we will be sure to connect you with a local representative in your area. Additionally, if anyone is interested in attending future Henry Schein webinars, visit henryscheindental.com/webinars for our upcoming schedule. As a thank you for attending tonight, everyone will receive this recording via email sometime in the next week. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back here soon.
Thank you, guys.